Why in the year 2025 do people leave the Democratic Party? Well, you know what? It might not shock you to hear this, but it's usually not going to be because of policy. Yeah, shocker. So I think one thing that sheds a lot of light on this is actually looking at the 1960s, looking at Reagan changing parties. He went from Democrat to Republican in 1962, which obviously was before the Civil Rights Act was signed. And the Civil Rights Act, of course, led to a massive political realignment. Richard Nixon then won in 1968, campaigning on this Southern strategy to appeal to Southern whites, racism. It was also before the Great Society. Johnson implemented the Great Society starting in 1964. John F. Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. But Reagan, leading up to the 1960s, had been a Democrat. He had been fairly progressive, and not just because he was in Hollywood, because believe it or not, Hollywood was more conservative in the 30s and 40s. You had a bunch of really hardcore conservative actors like Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne, Gary Cooper, Clark Gable, allegedly. So Reagan is progressive. He supports FDR, he supports the New Deal programs, he supported Harry Truman, big labor guy, big union guy. But then in 1962, he apparently got tired of what he called the bullying tactics of labor. Labor movement is bullying me, so I'm gonna have to change parties to teach them a lesson. But he assures you that he didn't leave the Democratic Party left him. Some personal stuff, I guess. And then by 1980, he's like, yeah, no, we're gonna run on supply side economics. I'm really sick of these welfare queens who don't do anything and get all their money. They fill up their treasure chests from government welfare. They don't even have to work. And yeah, the Great Society, he says, has failed America. It's failed hardworking Americans, and it only helps bottom dwellers who just want to mooch off the government and not contribute to our great country. So yeah, he had the opportunity to stay in the Democratic Party, stay in the more progressive lane. John F. Kennedy certainly was a popular president at the time, and he could have said, you know what, I want to be part of this party. JFK, a great speaker, just like Reagan, immaculate hairline, just like Reagan, but he's like, no, the labor movement is bullying me. Does this sound kind of familiar? Does this sound kind of like a why I left the left thing? Does this sound kind of like Dave Rubin in 2018 when he said, leftists were so mean to me, so I had to change parties? Does this sound kind of like, what the premise is underlying Tulsi Gabbard's argument for changing parties, where she said, oh, I had to leave the Democratic Party because they became the party of war and they were really bad to me. Kamala Harris was mean to me on the debate stage, and President Trump is such a victim. I saw the criminal justice system target him, and he's anti-war. Now that is a total lie. That is far-right propaganda, the idea that he's anti-war. That mostly just stems from the Russia issue. Like, Russia, he's not gonna help Ukraine enough, which is a good thing. He's not gonna help Ukraine fight Russia. So that's good. He's going to let Russia win, and that will lead to peace somehow. So both parties are rather pro-war when you look at it. Maybe not like neocon style George W. Bush. The Republican Party is less neocon in some ways than it was under George W. Bush. But objectively, both parties are pro-war. But Tulsi Gabbard comes out, and because she feels so scorned by the Democratic Party, especially people like Hillary Clinton. She has always hated Hillary Clinton, even when Gabbard was a Democrat. But she says, that's it, Democrats. You've pushed me so far. I'm going to have to become a Republican now. And then she becomes part of Trump's cabinet. Look at another guy, Jeff Van Drew. You might not know Van Drew super well, but he's a New Jersey congressman. And he, of course, he was Democratic. He considered himself a moderate Democrat. But then, the Trump era comes along. There were these attempts to impeach Trump, the first of which being over the Ukraine phone call thing in July 2019. The impeachment itself was voted on, I believe, in January 2020 or February 2020. But Jeff Van Drew saw this, and he was like, I don't know about this. This is really mean. You shouldn't try to impeach the president over this. This is bad. And then he said he is declaring his undying support for President Trump. Undying support from Democratic Party, just a moderate to be fair, but to undying support for Trump. And then by the 2020 election, he actually won that election in New Jersey, a blue state. But in the 2020 election, he was kind of trying to walk away from his undying support comments. But yeah, it worked out for him. He still won. So you've got these people who are like, I was a Democrat and now I'm a hardcore Republican or a Trump sycophant. RFK Jr., again, that's just a weird one because he's not necessarily, someone who was super far left at first on most issues, although he was an environmentalist. And he wasn't someone who was just viciously anti-Republican, so not necessarily like a New Deal style guy. But then he goes and feels like, oh, the Democratic Party was too mean to me. The Democratic Party was too mean to me, so now I need to join leagues with Trump. He endorses him in August 2024, and you get all these people saying, oh yeah, the former Democrat, a Kennedy, joined Trump. That just shows you the Democratic Party has really gone off the deep end. By golly, when you've lost a Kennedy, you really have lost the sanity of the Democratic Party. Never mind the fact that everyone, almost everyone in his family, the Kennedy family, was condemning him for it, saying, what on earth? Look, you're my family member, but you're supporting this guy? That is totally antithetical to everything that we believe. And yeah, it was embarrassing. It was horrible for JFK's legacy in their eyes. You know, it's like, what? You know, RFK Sr., JFK, they would not support this guy. They would recognize he's an authoritarian. They would recognize he's trying to dismantle a lot of the Constitution and the things that make this country great. But yeah, then you've got the RFK Jr. simps who are like, yeah, no, guess I'm on the right now. They purported to be, you know, somewhat of a mixed bag at first, being like, yeah, no, I'm left-wing on the issues where it's good to be left-wing, and I'm right-wing on the issues where it's good to be right-wing, but now they're mostly just Trump sycophants. So RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, Jeff Van Drew, Ronald Reagan, they all are people who are basically making this a personal thing. You know, oh, Jeff Van Drew is saying, I feel sorry for Trump. Reagan, Gabbard, RFK, they basically just felt scorned by the Democratic Party. I'm sorry to say, but feeling scorned by a political party is not a valid reason to change that party. Now look, there are all these stories from people who purport to have changed parties where they say, I thought that Trump supporters were just so nasty and vile and racist and bigoted, but then I went to a Trump rally and the people there were extremely kind to me. They were compassionate, they were generous, they were not rude at all. And you know what? That may well be true. That may well be true. There are some people in the media who do over-exaggerate how vicious Trump supporters are. And they try to make them out to be like actual terrorists, psychopaths, bullies. But it's perfectly possible to have an interaction with a Trump supporter and be like, oh, they were pleasant, you know? And you would never guess that they're a Trump supporter. But is it valid to change your entire worldview, all of your political positions, or at least purport to, based on, oh, I thought that Trump supporters were really nasty people, but then I interacted with them and I thought, oh, they're so nice. Wow, that's cool. You know, only a good person would support Trump. So I guess, you know, since I'm a good person, I got to support Trump. Really? So yeah, it's understandable to feel like in some ways the Democratic Party has gaslit you. You know, look at the Biden age thing, where some of them said he's sharp as a tack. And then this June debate happens and he's like, oh, we finally beat Medicare. And everyone's like, holy cow. So it's totally fine to feel scorned and gaslit by the Democratic Party. It's not fine, it's not understandable, and it comes off as very dishonest to say, oh, because of what the Democratic Party did, I have got to change all of my political opinions. I am joining leagues with the right. That's what someone, I think it was Lindy Lee, she sort of did that. She was a Kamala Harris staffer. And then she's like, yeah, no, MAGA. Right after the election, basically. This was before Trump even took office for his second term. She was just like, yeah, no, MAGA. And she became a border hawk. She's critical of, you know, so-called communism, which is to say, you know, essentially the government helping people in her view. So it's a very tired playbook. You know, it goes back to the 60s for crying out loud. I just pointed out, oh, I'm tired of the bullying of the labor movement, so I'm going to become a Republican. I'm going to become a Republican because some people, a faction of the left, was mean to me. Sorry to say, but there are factions of the left who are very nasty and mean. There are factions of the right who are very, very nasty and mean, but that's not necessarily a valid reason to be a leftist. You choose to be a leftist because left-wing policy appeals to you. You think that it's better than the alternative. You think that it's less bad than the alternative. You think it'll improve the country. And you believe that in spite of how bad people on the left may act. And there are tons of cringy left-wing Facebook posts, left-wing X posts, stuff that I would totally disavow, stuff that's vicious and disgusting. But that doesn't make me go, you know what? I have to become hard right now. I'm going to post an endorsement of Trump. I will run as a Republican because the left has just gone so insane. That's Dave Rubin tier garbage. So in 2025, 2024, you know, just the general recent era of politics, it unfortunately seems like most of the reasons for people leaving the Democratic Party boils down to, oh, they were mean to me. They were mean to me. Or and I guess this is the more genuine aspect of the party change, and I'm willing to give a tiny bit of credit because they're at least focused on policy, but social issue stuff. Just, I feel like they went too far on social issues, too far left, which again, you may hold that opinion. You may well hold that opinion. But if you prioritize the needs of the working class over, what you believe is cringe positions on social issues, you should still be Democratic. You should still be progressive. I think Saagar Enjeti actually said that he didn't get behind Bernie in 2020 because Bernie was too woke. Okay, so you're gonna abandon economic populism because you're scared of wokeness, because wokeness sends shivers down your spines. He talked too much about the plight of racial minorities. He talked about how he thinks abortion should be a constitutional right. He talked about how it's not a big deal which of the two gendered bathrooms you decide to go into. Seriously? Transgender people playing in sports? Boo-hoo. Boo-hoo. There are people in this country who can barely afford groceries. We may be entering a recession. Other countries are laughing at us. And you're concerned about wokeness. That's what you're concerned about. That's what is going to drive you to change your political party. I'm sorry. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. It's more credible because it's at least more policy focused than the whole personal angle. But it still is not good enough. If you purport to care about the needs of the working class, if you purport to care about the overall economic well-being of the country, the well-being of the country as it relates to the position on the world stage, you should be more on the left, generally speaking. Not to mention environmental issues. Do you want a party which completely disregards climate change? If you're someone who says, I'm really concerned about climate change. I'm very afraid that we could face some apocalyptic scenarios as a result of it, and I definitely believe that it's man-made. But I am really upset about wokeness within the Democratic Party. The left has gone too woke. So despite my concern about the world possibly ending at some point due to climate change, I will join leagues with the people who say that climate change is a hoax at worst, or that it's not made by man, slightly better than saying it's a total hoax, or that they say, well, yeah, it's man-made, but we don't really want to do much about it. All of these three things are wrong. So yeah, they join leagues with the wrong people because their feelings got hurt because of wokeness. Sometimes wokeness can be very cringe. I get it. But keep your eyes on the prize. Have the right priorities. Politics is about holistic approaches, not being a single issue voter. You're free to be a single issue voter. That's your right, You can still vote that way. But if you have the right priorities, you should not be joining leagues with Donald Trump, the MAGA Republicans, the Republican Party generally, over silly nonsense. Wokeness, personal vendettas, feeling scorned, feeling like Trump is a victim of the criminal justice system, or big bad impeachment attempts on him. None of that nonsense should be driving you to change parties. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I always love talking about this subject, political realignment. It's very interesting. We might be seeing one. Trump's presidency might bring about something like that. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, or subscribe to the channel. This is the more the merrier, and I look forward to speaking to you in my next video.